Glenn Miller wasn't just a musician, he was a phenomenon. He was to swing bands what the Beatles are to rock and roll. But then he disappeared. Who would walk away from this type of success willingly? He cracked the code on swing only to walk away from it at the height of his fame to serve his country during World War II. But that's not where his story ends. In the 1930s and 40s, his music was everywhere. Setting the rhythm of a generation with songs like In the Mood and Moonlight Serenade. But on December 15th, 1944, Glenn Miller boarded a small plane bound for Paris and was never seen again. No wreckage, no distress signal, just gone. So what really happened? Was it a tragic accident or a cover-up? Or was it something even more mysterious? So without further ado, let's play it again, Sam. The making of a musical genius. Before Glenn Miller became the man whose trombone set the beat of hearts across dance halls and airwaves, he was just a small-town boy with big dreams. Born on March 1st, 1904 in Clarinda, Iowa, Alton Glenn Miller was raised in a world where music wasn't just a pastime, it was a way of life. His family moved around a ton, settling in Nebraska and later Colorado. And with every new home, young Glenn carried a passion for sound, and he heard new tunes from a bit of everywhere. He started out on the mandolin, but let's be honest, a mandolin doesn't exactly scream future band leader. It wasn't long before he picked up that trombone, and that was that. The instrument would define his signature sound. He was the kind of kid who was obsessed with perfecting things, and so in high school, he spent hours practicing that trombone, determined to be the best. And by the time he graduated, his mind was made up. Music was his future. But being passionate about music didn't mean instant success. Glenn bounced from one college to another before dropping out of the University of Colorado to chase his real dream. So he hit the road as a struggling musician. Playing in pit orchestras and backing up some of the era's biggest names, including Benny Goodman. He even studied under legendary composer Joseph Schillinger, who helped him refine the meticulous, tight-knit arrangements that would later define the Glenn Miller sound. He was a man obsessed with getting things just right, always searching for the perfect way to arrange a tune, balancing melody and rhythm like a master craftsman. And while he hadn't quite struck gold yet, he was getting closer. At this point, Glenn Miller was just another talented musician trying to carve out a place in the crowded world of big band jazz. But the pieces were coming together. His sound was taking shape, and before long, he'd go from just another trombone player to the leader of the most recognizable swing band of all time. His music would become the soundtrack of a generation, but as we'll later see, his story would take a turn that no one saw coming, one that remains an unsolved mystery to this very day. From small gigs to big band fame. Making it big in the music world wasn't exactly a straight shot for Miller. Actually, he spent most of the 20s and 30s hustling, scraping by as a freelance trombonist, working as an arranger, and bouncing between bands. Constantly looking for that perfect sound, but he had to play with anyone who would have him, from Ben Pollock's band to the Dorsey brothers, rubbing elbows with future legends but never quite stealing the spotlight himself. He did form a couple of his own bands, but they fizzled out faster than a candle in the wind. The problem was not talent. Miller had plenty of that. It was finding that magic formula, that unique sound that would make people sit up and listen. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1938, he put together a new band, one that wasn't just another carbon copy of Benny Goodman or Artie Shaw. This time, Miller doubled down on precision and clarity, crafting a sound where every note had its place. Glenn leaned into the saxophones playing in unison, backed by a steady, danceable rhythm section, something that no one else was doing. And that was the key. Glenn Miller and his orchestra, they took off like a rocket. By 1939, they were headlining at the Glen Island Casino, a hotspot with a powerful radio signal that sent their music across the country. Suddenly, Moonlight Serenade, it wasn't just a song, it was an anthem. From that point on, Miller was everywhere. His records were selling in the millions, his band was in Hollywood movies, and when he played a gig, the line stretched around the block. He wasn't just another band leader, he was the band leader. If you turned on the radio, you'd hear Glenn Miller. If you walked into a dance hall, couples would be swaying to In the Mood. The guy had done it, he had cracked the code. But success had a funny way of leading to even bigger decisions, and for Miller, fame wasn't the final destination. The biggest chapter of his life was still ahead, one that would take him far from the bandstand and straight into the heart of World War II. And that's where things started to take a turn that no one could have predicted. And hey, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up icon, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you always come with us on the road trips down memory lane. Alright, moving on. The sound that defined an era. Glenn Miller didn't just lead the band, he created a sound. His signature was that silky smooth saxophone section, playing in the perfect unison with the rich, almost hypnotic quality that wrapped around a melody like a warm embrace. The sound was polished, it was precise, and it was unmistakably Glenn Miller. Songs like In the Mood, Moonlight Serenade, and Chattanooga Choo Choo, they weren't just catchy. His music was more than entertainment, it was a lifeline during uncertain times. By the early 40s, war was creeping into every corner of daily life, and Miller's music became a huge source of comfort. We've seen this happen before, like Shirley Temple helping Americans broken by the Great Depression, which we also cover in a separate video, but be warned, it's a bit heavy.
Farewell, 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 Mr. Gloom, be on your way.
But it's the same concept, with Glenn Miller giving Americans reasons to smile in some of the darkest days in the history of the world. It gave people something familiar to hold on to, a reason to dance, to forget, even if it was just a song or two. But hey, there's something else too. Miller's music didn't just belong to America, it traveled across the Atlantic, following the troops who were fighting a war on foreign soil. His records were played on armed forces radio, and his songs became part of the soundtrack of World War II. No matter who you are or how popular, there are only so many musicians who can boast about something that huge. There's something really profound about that, how a few carefully arranged notes could boost morale and make home feel a little closer, even from thousands of miles away. His music was order in a world of chaos, and maybe that's why it still resonates today. It wasn't just about the notes on the page, it was about the way it made people feel. Glenn Miller had conquered the music world, but in 1942, he did something no one expected. Seriously, at the height of his fame, he walked away. He traded his tuxedo for a military uniform. He wasn't just going to support the war effort, he was going to be a part of it, and that decision would change everything. Trading stardom for service. At the peak of his fame, Glenn Miller did something that stunned the world. He gave it all up. In 1942, while other big band leaders were securing safe stateside roles or using their celebrity to boost morale from afar, Miller made a very, very bold decision. He was going to enlist. He was 38 years old, too old for the draft, and a man of his stature could have easily stayed home, leading a cushy career in Hollywood or on the radio. But that just wasn't his style. Miller believed in service, and he believed in the power of music. He didn't just want to entertain the troops, no, he wanted to be in the thick of it, bringing the music to them. So he wrote to the Army, offering his talents, and after some bureaucratic back and forth, he was sworn in as a captain in the Army Air Forces. Just like that, the Glenn Miller Orchestra, as the world knew, was done. But Miller didn't just slap on a uniform and keep doing what he was doing. No, he completely reinvented military music. He took over the Army Air Force Band and transformed it. Traditional marching ensemble, no more. Now it's a modern, swing-infused powerhouse that played for the troops in bases and hospitals across the US and Europe. His mission? Simple. Lift spirits and keep morale high. And oh my god, it worked. Soldiers who had once jitterbugged to Miller's records back home were now hearing them live with new arrangements that blended military precision with big band energy. Songs like American Patrol and St. Louis Blues March became instant anthems. In Miller's broadcasts from England, they reached homesick soldiers and civilians alike. Let me put it like this: his music was a reminder of what they were fighting for. But in late 1944, Miller's mission would take him deeper into the war effort, and that's where his story takes a tragic, unexplained turn, one that still baffles historians to this day. The Vanishing Act, December 15th, 1944. Glenn Miller had faced plenty of challenges in his life, but nothing like what lay ahead on that cold December day in 1944. By this point, he had relocated his Army Air Force Band to England, playing concerts and broadcasting morale-boosting performances for the troops stationed across Europe. The toast to the host of those who... But again, Miller wasn't the kind of guy to sit back and let things happen. No, he wanted to be where the action was. With the Allies closing in on victory, he had big plans to move his band to newly liberated Paris, where they could perform for soldiers on the front lines. And so, on December 15th, he boarded a small, single-engine UC-64 Norseman aircraft in England, bound for France. It was supposed to be a routine flight, nothing unusual, but Miller never made it. Somewhere over the English Channel, his plane simply vanished. No distress signals, no wreckage, no answers. At first, no one even realized he was missing. The flight hadn't been officially recorded in military logs, and with the war raging on, a missing aircraft wasn't exactly headline news.
Major Glenn Miller, director of the U.S. Air Force Band, is missing on a flight from England to Paris, it was announced today.
But when Miller failed to arrive in Paris, alarms began to go off. His band, his friends, his fellow servicemen, no one had any idea what happened. It wasn't until a few days later that the military confirmed what many had feared. Glenn Miller, the man who had been the soundtrack of an era, was gone. And just like that, one of the most famous musicians in the world had disappeared without a trace. No body was even ever found. No definitive explanation ever given. It was as if he had been erased from the sky. Of course, we know very well by now that when someone that famous vanishes into thin air, the theories just start flying just as fast as the rumors. Heck, even when things are pretty officially declared, theories still pop up. Just look at Elvis. So, what about Glenn Miller? Was it mechanical failure, enemy fire, a tragic mix-up? Over the years, plenty of explanations have surfaced, but none have ever been proven beyond a doubt. And the strangest part, some of the theories that sound the most far-fetched might not be so crazy at all. Let's take a look at what people think happened to Glenn Miller, and why the truth remains just out of reach. Theories, rumors, and wild speculation. When someone as famous as America's shining star and beacon of hope, Glenn Miller, disappears without a trace, the world does not just accept it and move on. People need answers. And in the absence of concrete facts, speculation runs wild. The official story, the one most historians lean toward, is that his plane simply went down due to mechanical failure or bad weather. What do we have supporting this? Well, notably, the UC-64 Norseman was a small, unheated aircraft, and it was flying in terrible winter conditions over the English Channel. So yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster, and from there we can get a bit more specific. Some believe the plane's carburetor may have frozen, and that would have cut the engine mid-flight. In this theory, Miller's disappearance is still a tragic accident, nothing more than an unfortunate consequence of war and less than ideal resources breaking apart by Mother Nature. But here's the thing, no wreckage was ever found. No bodies, no debris, just endless water and endless questions. And when the answers don't add up, the human mind starts to wonder, you know? One of the more widely accepted alternate theories involves friendly fire. According to some reports, on the same day Miller's plane was in the air, a squadron of British bombers had been returning from an aborted mission over Germany. Standard procedure at the time was to dump any unused bombs in the channel before landing to avoid potential accidents on the runway. So some believe Miller's plane may have been flying right beneath these bombers at the worst possible moment, caught in accidental airstrike. This theory, while grim, actually has some military credibility. Pilots from the mission later reported seeing a small plane in the area, and while it was never confirmed to be Miller's, the timeline matches up a little too well. So if true, it would explain why there was never a distress signal. And of course, what celebrity mystery would be complete without so many conspiracy theories too outlandish to believe? But they still refuse to go away. One popular claim says Miller never got on that plane at all, but instead died in a Parisian brothel, with the military covering it up to protect his image and theirs. Another suggests he was actually a secret agent, working on a classified mission for the US government and was either captured or eliminated before he could reach France. While these ideas are more fiction than fact, they show just how much intrigue still surrounds his fate. Because when a man as famous as Glenn Miller vanishes, people don't just accept that he fell into the ocean. They need a better story. But after decades of investigation, declassified documents, and historical research, are we any closer to the truth at all? There may not be a smoking gun, but there are some key details that help us piece together what really happened that day. And as we sift through the facts, one thing remains certain. Whatever the real story is, Glenn Miller's disappearance remains one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. Piecing together the truth. For decades, Glenn Miller's disappearance has been clouded by speculation, but when you strip away the wild theories and sensational rumors, what do we actually know? The reality is, while no definitive proof has ever surfaced, the most likely explanation remains the simplest one. That his plane went down due to mechanical failure or severe weather, or both. The UC-64 Norseman wasn't exactly built for long flights over frigid waters. It had a notoriously unreliable carburetor, which in cold conditions could ice over and cause the engine to fail mid-air. Pilots familiar with the aircraft have pointed out that if the engine died, the plane would have had little chance of recovery. If that's what happened, Miller and the two other men on board, Pilot John Morgan and Lieutenant Colonel Norman Basel, would have gone down quickly, sinking into that English Channel without a trace. Then there's the friendly fire theory, which, while more dramatic, does have some real weight behind it. Decades after the war, flight logs from British Lancaster bombers surfaced, detailing how they had been ordered to jettison their unused bombs over that channel that same afternoon. And yet some of the airmen later recalled seeing a small plane beneath them just before the bombs were released. Of course, it's not confirmed it's Miller's, but the possibility remains. Maybe he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's eerily plausible. Unfortunately, no matter the so-called rules of war, anything can and has been a target, whether by genuine accident or otherwise. And if his aircraft was hit by falling explosives, it would have gone down fast, too fast for any distress call. And since there was no radar tracking systems like we have today, the military wouldn't have had an exact location of where it disappeared. It would explain why no wreckage was ever found, leaving only questions. Modern researchers have continued digging, and while no physical evidence has surfaced, some compelling first-hand accounts have emerged. In the early 2000s, a fisherman claimed that his trawler had once pulled up twisted metal wreckage from the channel in an area consistent with Miller's flight path. Unfortunately, the debris was discarded before anyone could investigate. Another British diver claimed to have seen aircraft remains on the seabed in a location that could match Miller's disappearance. But bad visibility and lack of proper documentation meant the lead went nowhere. Even today, underwater searches for missing World War II aircraft occasionally turn up uncharted wrecks. Some of which could hold the answers, but without the serial numbers or identifying marks, the mystery just remains. In the absence of any physical evidence or definitive answers, the U.S. Army officially declared Glenn Miller, Pilot John Morgan, and Lieutenant Colonel Norman Basil missing in action on December 15, 1944. Despite various theories and decades of speculation, this remains the official stance. Glenn Miller's plane was lost over the English Channel, and the exact circumstances of his disappearance unknown. So, will we ever truly know what happened to Glenn Miller? Maybe. Wreckage could still be sitting at the bottom of the channel, waiting to be found. Or maybe his plane was lost in a way that left nothing behind, swallowed up by history like so many wartime tragedies. But one thing's for sure, his music didn't vanish with him.
To do, but don't forget the Air Corps has done some marching too.
Glenn Miller's legacy remains as strong as ever, and while we may never have all the answers about his fate, the sound he created, the joy he brought, and the impact he left on the world will never be lost. The legacy of Glenn Miller. The great Glenn Miller may have vanished, but his music never did. In fact, his disappearance only added to his legend. He wasn't just a band leader, he was the sound of an era, the man who captured the hopes and dreams of a generation in a few perfectly arranged notes. His music was more than entertainment. It was a source of comfort, of unity, a reminder of home during one of the darkest times in history. Even now, when you hear the opening notes of Moonlight Serenade, it's like stepping back into a world where swing ruled the airwaves and jitterbugging couples packed dance halls from coast to coast. His influence didn't fade with the war. His arrangements, his precision, and that unmistakable saxophone section shaped the way big band music was played forever. And yet, the mystery of his disappearance still lingers, keeping his name alive in ways no one could have predicted. Had Miller simply retired after the war, his music still would be legendary, but the what-if surrounding his fate, it gives his story an almost mythical quality. He became a figure frozen in time, a man who left at the height of his power, never growing old, never fading away. I think it's why people are still searching for answers, why researchers keep combing through old records, why divers keep scanning the seabed of the English Channel, hoping to find that one missing piece of the puzzle. We don't like unresolved endings, especially not when they involve someone as beloved as Glenn Miller. But maybe the truth is, we don't need an answer to keep his legacy alive. Glenn Miller's story is already bigger than his disappearance. It's in the millions of records sold, in the way his music still plays in movies, commercials, and ballrooms. In the influence he left behind on every big band that followed. His songs still bring people together, just like they did during the war, just like they always will. And maybe that's the real magic of Glenn Miller. The man may be gone, but the music, no, that's forever.
Free, you march, you march, you march. What are you doing? Your pack has got your back as stiff as stock.
Glenn Miller's story is one of music, ambition, service, and an unsolved mystery that refuses to quit. He altered the sound of swing, lifted the spirits of a nation, and then in an instant disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions and a timeless catalog of music. Was it an accident, a mistake, or something we'll never fully understand, at least not now? One thing is certain, Glenn Miller's legacy didn't sink into that English Channel. It lives on in every note of In the Mood, in the smooth, soaring melody of Moonlight Serenade, and in the enduring fascination with the man who made them famous. And so, what do you think happened that day in 1944? Let me hear your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up icon. Tell us why you liked it, tell us what I forgot. If you like all things nostalgia, you're gonna wanna subscribe. So until next time, from my entire team here at Do You Remember, we want to thank you so much for watching. And hey, keep swinging and keep wondering.